Hey, I'm Drew Paul Bell, and I received a Bachelor's of Architecture from Southern Polytechnic State University in 2014. And in this video, I'm going to present my thesis project that I presented for that bachelor's degree. My hope in doing this is that you're going to be able to get a little bit more context or just another example of what a thesis project might entail. All right, so here you can pause and read the actual design or the actual thesis statement. But the point of this project was really to design a learning commons type of building. On my own university campus at Southern Polytechnic, we didn't really have a great student center. The student center that was there, it was isolated on the edge of campus, and it didn't provide the social life that I think anybody would expect to have at a university. And this is something that really bothered me at my school. I felt like the social life wasn't as good as it should be. And so this is something that I really wanted to correct and work on my thesis project. A few ideas that were really inspiring to me were the idea of the cross-pollination of ideas and the importance of like interdisciplinary interaction. And so I think that there's a lot of value to be had in talking to people who are from different backgrounds or know different topics. So for example, if an architect and an engineer can get together and have a discussion, I think that more rich ideas can come out of that discussion than can necessarily happen from like a bunch of architects who are locked up in studio all day. And that was definitely the case on my campus, right? Architecture students were locked up in studio and they couldn't talk to the people over in the engineering building who were busy over there. Same thing with the business people who were scattered around in all the buildings all over campus and weren't centralized. This building that I wanted to build on Southern Poly's campus was going to be a learning commons building. It was kind of a non-denominational type of building where anybody could come and study and kind of be the hub of the campus and then bump into other people that they know and take full advantage of being at a university. So this one short study that I did, it was kind of like a narrative study where I looked at the events that might happen in this building and throughout a day or as well throughout an academic year, and kind of try to pull out some of the rooms that might be there and kind of the mood that I wanted the building to, the void I kind of wanted it to fill, the thing I wanted it to serve. And so as I almost got into a second ago, this here is a little bit more the inspiration behind the project. I really believe that the biggest benefit of being at a university isn't just collecting facts. Like you can collect facts on the internet, you can look that up and have it. The benefit that you have at a university that you don't have after you've graduated is the connection to different people and different ways of thinking. And so if you can take part in this network, then I think that is going to be more valuable than just facts that you learn while you're there. All right, so now we're getting into the second part of this project, is the analysis of precedents. This graph here is just a chart showing there was a study conducted already by Karen Timberlake where they studied different student centers and then some of the common program types that were in those student centers. And so I kind of took that as a starting point. But one of the most kind of foundational analysis of the whole project was really this analysis of the Clough Undergraduate Learning Commons at Georgia Tech. It's also known as the CULC. This is about 20 minutes. Georgia Tech is about 20 minutes down the road from where I went to school. This building was designed by Bolin Sawinski Jackson, who are the same architects that have done the Apple stores. This building here is a perfect example of like the non-denominational student building where students can come to study, and you can see like there's tons of activity in this space. Like we didn't have any building like this at Southern Poly. There wasn't a building where people went to and they socialized and they kind of could study in different degrees of isolation or connectivity, right? Maybe you want to be in the thick of it when you're studying and be around a bunch of activity and talking with a bunch of people. Maybe you want to be more isolated and have more of a quiet space, but nonetheless be like connected to the stuff going on. We have, by the way that I'm showing this to you right now is on, it's a layout that I presented, I had printed. So a lot of these are viewed as spreads, so I'm going to be flipping back and forth between individual pages and spreads. But to talk about this building, though, this building provided a lot of different types of study spaces, and it worked really well. So I started studying this to really figure out why and how that happened. And I was able to identify these 8 different types of spaces that really made up this the social life of this building. And so if you can imagine the difference between studying in a room that's laid out like a field where it's almost like a cafe and there's tons of people kind of everywhere, versus a wall space where people are kind of lined along the wall, or a pocket space that's kind of separated and pulled away from like primary path of travel. It kind of has a degree of enclosure, but still is open to like walkways, as opposed to a room that's completely isolated, like a small study room that's almost secluded compared to the open activity of the field, or a cul-de-sac located at the end, more enclosed. So anyway, I looked at the way that each one of these kind of has a direction of their attention. So a wall has kind of a directed attention. You can see here people sitting along what I'm calling a wall space. Walls within kind of a broader field area here. You can see the chaos and the large, I shouldn't say chaos, but like the broader plan of the more open plan of a field. And I further analyze like the way that attention is directed, the amount of activity that's there, as well as like how well it interacts with like what's around it. All right, and so then you can pause and look at any one of these a little bit more if you want. The space there's spaces I call the cul-de-sac, the pocket, the hallway, rooms, which are completely separated off with doors, the perch, which there was only one of these, and it's located like over kind of a primary atrium space, and then the singularis, which is what I call this space here. And this is a really unique space within the Colk. Is one that's kind of different than all the others. It's on these stairs that provides kind of this amphitheater type of situation. There's lots of people walking through this axis of the building and through this atrium space. The building was also further facilitated by labs, so people might have like labs within the space. So they may be going to this space already intentionally, or for offices. So this isn't necessarily one that you just go to because you feel like it. It might be a building where people actually have classes in. And so we see here a diagram of the Colk. There's a lot of diversity of the spaces, and you can see how they all make up. They make up the entire building. There aren't like separate classrooms. We have lab rooms. They're kind of separated group spaces and offices, but other than that, there's a lot of study spaces to be had, and it's kind of open for students to use however they feel like it. There's also relationships that you can see between different atriums. We have minor atriums kind of on the north side of the building, and a major atrium on the south side of the building. A lot of fields located around that. So I spent a lot of time analyzing kind of the patterns of how these different spaces are related to each other. You can see here, this is like a pocket space next to a room, and you see that same pattern occurring in multiple locations. And so that was one of the those relationships were relationships that I emulated in designing a building on Southern Poly's campus. And another component to this building, which is why it's so successful, is where it was located on their campus. And you see here, these are two. It's located at the intersection of a number of major sidewalks, and I may call these sidewalks streets. They aren't occupied by cars, but these are primary travel paths. It's also located next to the Tech Green, which is a big open field used for ultimate frisbee, and it's kind of a major social point on campus as well. It is also located close to their own student center and their libraries, connected to the library, so they can kind of have some through traffic into there. This analysis here is looking at those sidewalks or the streets to show a connection and integration analysis. And so this is run with a program that analyzes a street based on how many intersections there are on that street. The connection shows how many streets one street touches. Integration considers not only how many streets that street touches, but how many streets those streets touch. For example, this main street here might touch 100 streets, but if they're all dead ends, that's not worth a whole lot. But if it actually touches a lot of streets that are then connected to other streets that are then connected to several other streets and then other streets, it then gets an even higher rating. So you can see here, this is before the Colk was built on Georgia Tech's campus, and you can see these primary streets here. And keep an eye right here. And then this is after the Colk was built. So here's the Colk building, and you can tell this street here has gone from, it wasn't a red, but it was one of the bigger yellow orange lines. This here, it kind of connected this street to this main thoroughfare. And in doing that, it didn't just like find one that worked, and it didn't just find like a sidewalk that worked and set itself down there. It even created this new sidewalk that connected these two. So this alone kind of even enhanced the circulation space and the paths of travel on the campus. And by doing that, it also brought more people into the building and made it more usable. You can see here analysis. This is an analysis of Southern Poly's student center, and remember the diversity of the plans at Georgia Tech. This shows a series of what I call lab spaces. These are almost like classrooms. Some of these were open classrooms that you could rent, but like the Student Government Association would meet in these, or like housing might meet in these. But it wasn't really used by students. A lot of students, they would have these fields, but these fields, they weren't directional. There wasn't no density in these kind of interaction spaces. It was hard to really foster interactions, because if you weren't in the mood to be in the field, like in a cafe type of situation, then you wouldn't go study here. If you wanted a more secluded private room, that wasn't available. And we had two little wall spaces that were kind of carved out of niches, but you can tell this wasn't even intended to really be it really wasn't a quality space to be studying or to interact with people. And so there's a lot of offices, but if you're not going to visit a teacher, like there's really not many reasons to be in the student center. You see here, this is an analysis of Southern Poly's campus, and you can see kind of the major thoroughfares. But what's interesting about this is that from being on the campus and going around campus all the time, we can look at this, and I shared this observation with many people. You can look at this map of Southern Poly, and you might assume that like this is a major street, so to speak, on the campus, a major sidewalk. But it really doesn't feel like people walk on this that often. A lot of times they move this way because we have a parking deck located here, and parking is located up here and down here. There doesn't seem to be a lot of travel here. They kind of jog through other buildings, and the circulation path is a little off kilter. But taking advantage of this, I chose to locate my building here at the intersection of the two most common sidewalks on the campus. And you see that enlarged square here. These K buildings, this is the nomenclature of the buildings on Southern Poly's campus. These K buildings, these two, and then there's another one under here. These were actually slated for demolition, along with kind of the school's master plan. This building had been abandoned, I think, my entire time at school, and so I was proposing to put a building here in its place. Then I also analyzed the other buildings on Southern Poly's campus. So one of the things I looked at was the mass of the building. A lot of the buildings on campus were like single or double loaded corridors. These didn't really provide space for socialization. They had room for hallway corridors and like walking space, and then just to get access to the program space. So it didn't have social spaces where you could kind of like meander around and find a place. It didn't lend itself to that. It was more directional type of building. You walk down the hallway one way, or you walk down the hallway the other way. But there weren't a lot of spaces where you can socialize in. There's a rhythm that you can see on the facades of the buildings, marked by these solar shades, and so I use a similar rhythm with using the solar shades and the kind of shade and shadow technique in the building that I designed, as well as that same rhythm also kind of was articulated on the facade with these kind of colonnades. And you see these in several of the buildings on campus, and I interpreted that in the design for Southern Poly's campus as more like an atrium space. That was actually very similar to the atrium space in the Clough Undergraduate Learning Commons. So what I did next this is the design process. This is part 4, and I looked at each of these spaces that I identified and considered how they all related to each other and related to the whole building, because I feel like there's got to be a certain proportion, right? You could look at the Southern Poly building and know that there were just a bunch of fields and like 1 or 2 pockets, but there was like no rooms. All these others were drastically out of proportion, and a huge number of offices. So I proposed that we consider the proportion of a building that we know already works, and then scale it down proportionally to the campus based off the student population at this campus. So if you take all these spaces, we need only this many spaces. So then here we have a mod. So I took these pieces that I was able to kind of identify from the Calc, and then assemble them in a way that represented the same relationships that we saw worked at the Clough Undergraduate Learning Commons. So you can see here that same combination that I mentioned earlier. You see pockets being used to kind of further separate rooms from primary circulation space. There was also one in the other building that used a number of rooms that were located off of wall seating that then had relationships to minor atriums. Several of the larger fields were located next to the larger atrium space, the perch located above the singularis. And this takes, the way that I like to think about this is it is as if we were able to take the same like DNA of the one building, put it in a different environment, and watch it kind of grow to become its own thing that still comes from the original DNA, yet is adequately built for a different site, a different location. So thinking about this in terms of like the DNA of the building, that was really interesting. Here you can see the plans. This is that colonnade kind of reinterpretation you can see here. Dashed lines are you see the open space here. We have a number of what I'm calling labs and kind of like closed off large spaces, as well as fields being separated by those labs. Offices, study rooms across from walls with relationships to atriums. A roof deck on the top. We have here some renderings. This is that atrium space. And you see here the singularis was also largely inspired by the same one at Georgia Tech. And so this atrium too, it lines itself up right on that axis. And I think that in the same way that the Clough, or that the Calc was able to take advantage of already the circulation paths on the campus, I think this building will as well with how it's located, especially in this atrium space. And so then this one here becomes something that people will walk into as they're going down this sidewalk that will lead them straight through the front doors and through this social hub. You can see here a section with this relationship between the major atrium space, and we only have one minor atrium space here because of the smaller building. And then rendering of the roof garden up top with solar. We have solar shading devices on the sides to try to minimize the heat up top, make that a little less harsh, as well as on the western side of the building. We have here a diagram of those spaces. Also looking at how the building sits within this context, adding in this amphitheater type space. I think this reaching across the sidewalk was something that I think would be really cool because of taking advantage of this primary sidewalk. You can see in the analysis that this is one of the primary circulation paths on campus before as it already existed. So by making this an amphitheater, demolishing the existing low wall right here that separates people from using this hill, it really celebrates this and uses it effectively while turning this main walkway into kind of like more of like a theater, like a stage. And here's a rendering of that corner, and this is like the primary corner on campus with the intersection of the two major sidewalks. We have solar shades here, with this being the west side of the building. I really wanted to take advantage of this, the circulation path, the circulation opportunity I had here on this edge, but with having the windows on the side of the building, it became very problematic with the western sun. So the Calc also used these sun shades on the west side of the building to minimize heat on that atrium space. So I'm employing the same tactics here, and so providing some relief from that. All right, so now we're into part 6. This is kind of a bonus part, I consider it. I was also, in addition to being in the architecture department, I was also a part of the honors department, and so to get that degree, it was necessary to do an extra chapter. One of the opportunities that we had was to do one where you take your building and apply it to a different site and see how it changes. Normally, that's very ambitious to take a project and basically design a second building within one semester. However, my project actually lent itself really well to that idea because it was actually about understanding the DNA of the building and about developing a method or process, more so than just the building itself. So to really test it, to see if that DNA or the process really worked the way that I claimed that it would, I actually designed a second building on a different campus. Funny enough, the semester, my final year in college, they actually announced that they were merging Kennesaw State University with Southern Polytechnic State University. And so it turned out very poetic, actually, that it made a lot of sense to build two different learning commonses, one on each campus of what would, in just a year or two, become the same university. I did a similar analysis of the Kennesaw State University campus. First of all, one interesting part was the mass of these buildings. So whereas Southern Poly tended to have kind of bar buildings that were single-loaded corridors or double-loaded corridors, a lot of the buildings in Kennesaw actually seem to have what would be almost like two double-loaded corridors with an atrium space in the middle, separated by a barrel vault atrium. And so this is very different from Southern Poly. We didn't have buildings like this on our campus. And these masses, they had much more bulky mass instead of like a linear mass. Shade and shadow was a little bit different too. They tended to have they tended to have narrow windows as opposed to, it was just a different rhythm than, say, the rhythm at Southern Poly. The materials were also quite different, bricks and stone and stucco. So taking the idea of the same DNA of the Culk, one that we know works, I then did the same proportional relationship between the Culk and between Georgia Tech and KSU. Being a larger university and being a larger campus, it would necessarily have more spaces. And so each one of these spaces got proportionally increased. I then built a similar diagram model, figuring out exploring where these spaces would go. And so it is, again, using some of the same language techniques. You can see here, again, the idea of the pocket separating the classroom. Labs are being used to kind of separate out those spaces. Corridors ending or terminating in a cul-de-sac type space. Rooms next to walls. Upstairs, and a roof deck, green roof space. And so this was large. This is inspired by the same DNA as the building at Georgia Tech, which inspired the same DNA of the building at Southern Poly. And so taking the analysis of KSU's campus, they had a lot of these barrel vaults, and so I used that again to create these atrium spaces here. Since it was larger than Georgia Tech's campus, it justified using more atriums. It had to be laid out differently, where you have almost like two double-loaded corridors along with another access corridor, and these spaces laid out in what I feel is a very similar way to the buildings at Kennesaw's campus. And now let me just explain that, like, I'm looking at these drawings now as a professional, and I know that I have no illusions that the craft on these drawings is below par. However, the design of this building took place in 2 days. Right? So to me, I believe that that's a real testament to this project as being really about a method and a process for design. Is about understanding the DNA and applying those into a building that could be executed quickly. And so while the craft of each one of these drawings is, I wish I could spend a lot more time on it. Some of these make me cringe right now. The design of this building took place in 2 days, and taking the DNA and doing this, to me, I think it was a great exploration in understanding how these spaces, how these buildings activate, and how kind of a system or a series of relationships can then be built into basically a schematic design, or a rough schematic design of a building in a short amount of time. Okay, so in addition to the additional building, I also had the opportunity to work with a fellow student who was majoring in video game design, James Neuromiser, and what James was able to do, so James was majoring in video game design. He was familiar with a program called Unity. Unity is used for a lot of video game design, obviously, and as well as simulation. So people can use Unity to simulate things like traffic patterns and potentially patterns of traffic within a building, if only they had a method of how to do that. So in the spirit of, poetically, my entire project was about the cross-pollination of ideas and interdisciplinary interaction. Through the very idea of interdisciplinary interaction, by talking with James about what he can do with video game design, we were able to realize that through my kind of taxonomy of spaces, through the spaces that I defined, we could mine data. We could go there and count how many people were in the different buildings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, right, to justify kind of the Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule and the Tuesday, Thursday schedule that happens on universities. We could take that information, and then with the taxonomy of spaces, he could then run simulations on how many people would be in any one of these spaces at any given time. So here's the app. This is work done with James. Each of what you see here, each of these circles are indicating the size, indicates how many people are in any one of these spaces. The color, if it's red, it communicates that someone has been there. People have been there for a long time. Blue means that people are leaving or that they're new. We have sliders on the right that show different floors, and we can also speed up the time. So each one of these spaces here in the calc represents the number of people that we tracked while we went through the building, tabulating how many people were in each of the spaces. We have a switch buildings button. And here is the Southern Poly proposed building that I designed. I kind of wish that, looking at the end product, I think that I wish that we could kind of have a few more back and forths about the design of the app. However, in terms of just quantifying data and communicating that data, I think that this is still a pretty huge step in just being able to communicate to any degree, predict the amount of people that would be in any space. So I think that this app was successful in that. So in this project, I really focused on understanding how a building can become activated and not just kind of like left empty. And I studied that through understanding the network of spaces of this successful building that I was already able to find, and then understanding the DNA of that, and then figuring out how that DNA could even adapt in a different environment on a different campus to then grow into a building that still was active and filled with life and filled with people. Poetically, that the root of that idea came from based on the value of the cross-pollination of ideas and interdisciplinary interaction. And poetically, I got to do just that through working with James, the video game designer, and video game design major. And we were able to kind of create a predictive model for how many people would be in a building, exactly how activated it would be. And so I think that this was a very successful thesis project. I really enjoyed it, and there was a lot of work that went into it. And let me know what you think about it on the comments down below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, why don't you just not leave a comment? No, I'm just kidding. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that it at least provided some level of inspiration, whether that was inspiration about what to do or inspiration about what not to do, about what to do way better. I hope that this video helps. Don't forget to leave a comment down below, like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this video. I hope it helps, and I will talk to you next time. If you're looking to find a thesis topic and you don't know what to do, I would advise you to spend some time thinking about the stuff that really annoys you, the stuff that really gets you bothered and pissed off. Like, dive into that and think about what that is. Tussle with those ideas and see if there's any way that you think architecture can minimize